Morning all. Military tanker drivers will take to the roads this morning to try and end the ongoing fuel shortage in England. Around 200 military personnel are involved. Half of them will be driving. They'll initially be concentrated on London and the southeast, where, of course, those worst shortages have been reported. Our reporter Aisha Zahid is at the Buncefield oil storage facility for us this morning. Good to see you, Aisha. Have we seen any movement yet?
Well, we've seen one or two tankers leave here this morning. It has been quite quiet, but no doubt we're going to see many more leave throughout the day. As you said, the efforts will concentrate on getting fuel to parts of the southeast and London, which are seeing the greatest shortages at the moment, and also the largest queues. A number of the stations I drove past this morning completely out of fuel, all queues starting to form there already. Now, there's going to be 200 military personnel involved in all of this, half of those drivers, the other half supporting the effort, and they're going to be leaving from here. Here, we actually saw them have some training over the weekend, them learning how to fill up the tankers, how to fill up pumps, and the government is insisting that the situation is easing, that it is coming under control. Boris Johnson said it's abating and that military were only deployed as a precaution. But the Petrol Retailers Association haven't quite agreed with that sentiment. They say that the problem is still rife, as I said, in parts of the southeast and London, where up to 22% of forecourts are currently dry. But they have said that it has alleviated and has virtually ended in north of England, in the Midlands and also Scotland.
Aisha, many thanks. And I'm very pleased to say, joining us now from the Conservative Party conference, the Chancellor, Rishi Sunak. Mr Sunak, very good to see you this morning. Lots for us to talk about, Neil. Particularly, of course, on supply chains, but we'll return to that just a little bit later. Why don't we start, though, with your big speech today and the big announcement contained therein, £500 million to get people into work?
Yes, good morning, Neil. I said over a year and a half ago at the beginning of this crisis that my economic priority was going to be people's jobs, and today's announcement doubles down on that. A year ago, we outlined our plan for jobs, and since then, the labour market has performed incredibly strongly. If you just think back, people were expecting the unemployment rate to reach 12%, and thankfully, it's less than 5%. It's been falling for months now, more and more people getting into work, record numbers of job vacancies. You know, that shows me that our plan for jobs is working, which is why today we're extending that plan for jobs into next year to keep supporting people.
All of which does suggest, though, Chancellor, and people will be very pleased that there is more money to assist people getting back into work, particularly those who are perhaps slightly older and looking for work. But doesn't all of this suggest that with the end of furlough, we will have to expect some pretty significant rises in unemployment?
I said right at the beginning of this crisis it wasn't going to be possible for me, or quite frankly any Chancellor, to save every single person's job. But what I do know is that the interventions that we put in place have made an enormous difference. As I said at the beginning of this crisis, people thought the unemployment rate would get to 12%. That's millions and millions of people out of work. In fact, the unemployment rate has now been falling for about 6 months in a row. It's under 5%. We have a lower unemployment rate here in the UK than America, Canada, France, Spain, Italy, amongst others. And there are record numbers of job vacancies. So I think the plan is working. Now, of course, some people sadly have lost their job and will lose their job. But that's why I want them to be reassured that we are throwing literally the kitchen sink at helping them get a new job, new skills, new opportunities. And we know that that's been working over the past 12 to 18 months. And that's why we're doing more of it today.
Clearly, as mentioned in the introduction, you are speaking to us from Manchester, from the Conservative Party conference. And one thing I am sure, practically every attendee would wish to hear from the Chancellor, and indeed the Prime Minister, is that there won't be any more tax rises. The manifesto promise has been broken once. Can you guarantee that it won't be broken again?
Well, it was a very difficult decision to put up people's taxes. No Chancellor wants to do that, certainly no Conservative Chancellor. Difficult for me, difficult for the Prime Minister. But just remember why we did that. That was to make sure that our NHS could get the significant resources that it needs to help recover strongly from coronavirus, given the backlog of missed operations. I will just get on to that. And also, alongside that, to usher in some reforms to social care that governments have ducked for decades. And this Prime Minister deserves enormous credit for gripping those and implementing some changes there, not least to invest in our social care workforce to make sure that they get the recognition that they deserve. And those things are significant investments, £12 billion, and we need to pay for those. And that's why we took the difficult but I believe responsible decision to do what we did.
Sure, but at the same time, we are hearing from the Local Government Association that they are going to have to see council tax rises, perhaps as large, well, coming close to double figures, 9%, to plug the black hole in social care. I mean, can you guarantee that we won't have to see a rise in council taxes?
Well, social care is funded by a mix of different ways. One way is through local taxes, like council tax and the adult social care precept. Now, that's existed for years. That's one part of the funding system. Yeah, and the other part of funding comes from national government. And
we know this,
well, I can't. Yes, and later in the year, we have something called the Local Government Finance Settlement, Neil, where the Secretary of State for local government sets out all the plans for local government for the coming year. It wouldn't be right for me to preempt that. But what people should know is we want to put more money into social care. That's why we took the decisions that we did. There will be, as I said, these are landmark reforms to cap the catastrophic costs that people will be liable for, more investment in the social care workforce, more integration between the NHS and social care, and, as I said at the beginning, significant investment in the NHS to make sure that we recover strongly and work our way through the backlogs.
Let's talk supply chain then, just for a brief second. It has been reported that figures from the industry met with representatives from the government back in June about the risks, the issues within the supply chain. They warned about potential numbers. Did that meeting not take place, or did the government just ignore that they had been warned that this was all coming down the pipeline?
So I'm not obviously aware of the particular circumstances of the meeting that you're describing, but what I would say, just to put this in context, now, of course, we're grappling with some challenges in supply chains that you highlighted, as did your report. I think the first thing to say is it's not just here. These things are happening all around the world because of the way that economies everywhere are recovering reasonably rapidly from coronavirus after a period of having been closed down. That's causing some adjustment issues, which all of us around the world are working through. And look, with regard to HGV drivers, you'll know, and your report covered some of the steps that we're taking to alleviate some of those issues, not least increasing the testing capacity of HGV drivers, temporary visas, 5,000 of which hundreds are starting imminently. You know, those are the types of things that the government can do to make a difference. Well, so I'm not aware of the particular meeting you had, but it's also worth bearing in mind that this, as I said, there are a shortage of HGV drivers, not just here in the UK, but across Europe. I think the last data I saw from an intelligence body said something like hundreds of thousands of shortages across Europe. So this is as I said, this is not just an issue that we are grappling with here. It's broader than that. But we are doing, and people should be reassured that we are doing absolutely everything we can to mitigate those challenges best we can.
I suppose the question is then, but you know, if we'd got started a little bit sooner on all of this, we might not be in the situation we're in at the moment, where both you and the Prime Minister are not ruling out shortages come Christmas time.
Well, what we are saying is we're determined to do everything we can, and we are, you know, whether it's with HGV drivers or more broadly, to ease some of the challenges that we're seeing in supply chains. So speeding up testing capacity, temporary visas, these are the types of things that can make a practical difference. We are committed to doing all of those, and we continue to engage with the industry and different sectors to see if there are other things that we should or could be doing. But as I said, we're working very hard to mitigate as much of the challenges here as possible, whilst acknowledging, you know, these are not issues that are confined solely to the UK. Many countries are seeing the same thing.
I mean, as someone else within your party said not that long ago, it does appear that the government believes that there is an upside to these big supermarket supply chains being broken up. I mean, if that's the case, what is it?
Sorry, I didn't quite understand your question. Upside into what? Sorry, Neil?
The upside into the breakup of the supermarket supply chains.
A breakup of the supply chains. I don't think anyone would say that there's an upside to, you know, people struggling with supply chain challenges and not being able to get what they want at the time they want it. No one wants to see that. I think what we have said more broadly is, over time, you know, one of our desires is to transition ourselves to a higher wage, high skill, more productive economy. I think that is a good thing. That's part of what today's Plan for Jobs announcement is about, in fact. It's giving people the skills they need to get well-paid jobs. Now, over time, that's the type of economy we want to have, which is why people don't want to just pull, as a Prime Minister, we don't want just to pull the lever on more unskilled migration. Now, in the short term, that's a pragmatic response to some of the things we're seeing, but longer term, we do want to have people in well-paid jobs, and I think that's probably the point, whether it was my colleagues or others have been trying to make. Indeed.
Just on Friday, in an interview, the Prime Minister said this: never mind life expectancy, never mind cancer outcomes, look at wage growth. What does it say of this Prime Minister's priorities that he eschews, concerns about rises in cancer diagnosis? He eschews concerns about, life expectancy dropping in favour of wages.
No, I think that is a mischaracterisation of what he said. And you started this interview earlier asking me about tax and tax rises. This is a Prime Minister and a government that has taken that difficult decision on tax precisely because we want to improve cancer diagnosis and catch up on all the missed appointments that people had. And just 2 days ago, we announced, I think, something like 40 new community diagnostic hubs across the United Kingdom to do exactly that, an early screening and diagnosis of things like cancer through MRI, through ultrasound, because we are committed to people's health. I think we've seen that over the last year and year and a half. And as this interview started with, we're prepared to do some quite difficult things on the tax side to make sure the NHS is well funded and to do so that we can do all the things that you just talked about.
Just on taxation, though, once again we have seen a fairly significant data dump of papers, this time referred to as the Pandora papers, pointing out that presidents, prime ministers, billionaires are all taking advantage of offshore tax regimes. Leaving that to one side, I just want to ask a very straightforward question. Have you ever benefited from an offshore arrangement?
No, I haven't, and I think I've seen these things overnight as well, and so obviously it's tough for me to comment on them specifically, given they've only just emerged, and of course HMRC will look through those to see if there's anything we can learn. But broadly, people should know that we have a very good track record on exactly this type of activity and tackling it. We've led the world in improving the sharing of information between tax authorities, law enforcement agencies, registers of what are called beneficial ownership. It's something that we are proud leaders of here in the UK. But as the paper showed, this is a global phenomenon. There's a global dimension to it. We can do our bit, but we require other countries to cooperate with us as well, and you will continue to expect us to press on that.
Indeed. And I wonder if I can just again end on a slightly personal note. You'll have noticed the advice coming from the police in London about how women should behave, telling them that they should flag down a bus if stopped by a suspicious police officer. I mean, you've got daughters yourself. They're quite young, but in a few years' time, they will be out of the family home. I just wonder what you make of that advice being given to your daughters.
Well, of course, we all should be able to trust the police, but the fact that you're even asking this question, I think, demonstrates to me and to everyone that there's a problem and we need to address it. And you've heard lots of people talk about some of the specific things we're doing, but it probably starts with everyone, and especially men, acknowledging what a problem this is and making sure that we recognise that anxiety. As you said, I have 2 young daughters. Wayne Couzens was roaming around an area where my home in London outside of Downing Street is, brought this home. We have to recognise what a challenge this is and work very hard to address people's fears.
Mr. Sunak, always good to see you on the programme. Thanks very much for joining us. Have a good conference.
Thank you, Neil.
Still to come on the programme. In a few minutes' time, I'm going to be joined by the British Meat Processors Association. Pig farmers are warning that hundreds of thousands of their animals may need to be culled due to a shortage of abattoir workers. Then at 7:45, I'll be talking to the Mauritius Tourism Authority as new UK travel rules make it a bit easier to go get some winter sun. At 8:20, we'll be hearing how some lockdown drinking habits have continued long after restrictions were eased. Also making the news this morning, a serving Metropolitan Police officer responsible for protecting Parliament and diplomats will appear in court today, charged with rape. 46-year-old PC David Carrick has been suspended from duty. The alleged offence is reported to have occurred in September. Well, in a statement, the head of the Metropolitan Police, Cressida Dick, said this: "I am deeply concerned to hear the news today that an officer from the Met's Parliamentary and Diplomatic Protection Command has been arrested and now charged with this serious offence. I fully recognise the public will be very concerned too. Now, it's been described as the biggest ever exposé of financial secrets. We were just talking to the Chancellor about it a second ago. And it does appear to implicate presidents, prime ministers and even billionaires. Millions of leaked files, called the Pandora Papers, are set to cause anger and embarrassment among some of the global elite. Financial dealings in London also come under scrutiny. Our international affairs editor, Dominic Waghorn, reports.
For decades, the rich have used offshore havens to hide away their money. And more, investigative journalists have tried to expose their methods. But never before on this scale.
It really kind of pulls back the veil of secrecy that hangs over this offshore world. It kind of reveals this global industry of not just corporate service providers, but bankers, lawyers, and accountants who are working quite hard to hide assets, to bend the rules, in some cases to break the rules for those who are wealthy or powerful enough to pay for it.
Nearly 12 million confidential files were leaked to investigators, uncovering the hidden assets of 35 current and former world leaders, more than 300 politicians and public officials. The documents come from 14 offshore financial service providers based all around the world. One leader singled out in what investigators have called the Pandora Papers is Czech Prime Minister Andrej Babis. Investigators claim he used offshore companies to buy a $12 million chateau in the French Riviera with 2 swimming pools and a cinema. He has rejected the claims on Twitter. "I have never done anything illegal or wrong," he said, but that doesn't prevent them from trying to denigrate me again and influence the Czech parliamentary elections. Many other members of the rich, the famous, the powerful are singled out in the papers for using the offshore financial system to hide their money and avoid paying tax. And one location comes up more than others. Despite all the controversy about London being used to conceal huge amounts of money, the city remains the destination of choice for many, it seems, desperate to park their cash without too many questions being asked. Dominic Waghorn, Sky News.
Also this morning, local politicians have described an oil spill off the coast of California as an environmental catastrophe. An estimated 126,000 gallons has spread into an oil slick covering around 13 square miles of the Pacific Ocean. It's thought that a faulty pipeline was the cause of the spill.
Here in Huntington Beach, our local response efforts have been focused on 2 major priorities. First, protecting the health and safety of our residents and visitors. And second, preventing an ecological disaster by mitigating the impacts of the oil on our precious wetlands and wildlife. This oil spill constitutes one of the most devastating situations that our community has dealt with in decades.
New UK travel rules come into force today, which should make overseas travel easier for those who are fully vaccinated. The so-called traffic light system has been scrapped. Let's take a closer look. The red, amber and green list will be replaced with one red list only, countries where COVID remains dangerously high. Fully vaccinated residents won't need to take a test before they come back to the UK if they're returning from non-red list nations. Still, a so-called Day 2 test will still be required for everyone arriving back in the country. But from the end of month in England, those who aren't vaccinated won't need to purchase a PCR and will instead be asked to take a lateral flow test. Those not vaccinated will still need to take a pre-departure test as well as a post-arrival PCR and will have to self-isolate for 10 days, no matter where they are coming from. And anyone returning from a red list country will need to pay more than £2,000 to quarantine at a government-approved hotel. You can find out more detail about those changes to restrictions at skynews.com or on the Sky News app. The Transport Secretary has suggested that the government will re-examine plans to extend the HS2 railway line to northern England. Speaking to the Financial Times, Grant Shapps said ministers were asking questions and would no longer blindly follow the original plans. 3 people are reported to have died after Oman was hit by Tropical Storm Shaheen. The storm, which had been downgraded from a cyclone, made landfall close to the capital of Muscat. 152 millimetres of rain has been recorded so far. That's almost double the average for the entire year. Let's take a quick look at the figures that show the impact of climate change. The top line there showing how the power in the country is being generated, a little more than a third coming from fossil fuels at the moment. Then you have the rise in global temperature since records began. Then you have the time left till an increase of 1.5 degrees Celsius, which many people view as the point of no return. Then at the bottom, total CO2 emissions in millions of tonnes. To New Zealand now, which has announced some of its strictest coronavirus restrictions. The Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern, announced that from Wednesday, 2 households can meet outdoors up to a maximum of 10 people. Early childhood education will return, and people can move around for recreation, such as beach visits and hunting. Wonderful story, this one. Officials from the European Space Agency have signed up a global star to try and persuade more girls to take up a career in space technology. Barbie will be taking up a career as an astronaut to encourage youngsters to join the space race, as Shingi Marariki reports.
Plastic, fantastic, and floating weightlessly in zero gravity. This one-of-a-kind Barbie is now for sale in a special week aimed at encouraging girls to become the next generation of astronauts, engineers, and space scientists. The woman the doll is modelled on is Italian astronaut Samantha Cristoforetti. She'll break new ground next year by becoming the first European to command the International Space Station. She hopes seeing her mini-me could mean liftoff for the dreams of both girls and boys interested in following in her boot prints.
I think boys and girls, they become passionate about things because they get excited, because they see something intriguing, because they see something funny. And so maybe those images will kindle a sparkle of passion in some girl's heart, and that would be incredible. The mini Samantha doll has already been on a parabolic flight. That means flying in special airplanes that will draw in the sky a parabola-shaped trajectory. And for about 20 seconds inside the cabin of the aircraft, you are actually weightless, which means you are floating around in the cabin, just like I will be floating weightless inside the space station.
Samantha's mission will see her follow in the footsteps of another European. Britain's very own Helen Sharman, who spent 8 days at a Russian space station in 1991. This is not the only time Barbie has set her sight on the stars. 4 years before man was on the moon, this figurine made it to space in 1965. Now, a generation later, she floats again. Seeing her in orbit could be the launch pad needed for the next crop of space explorers. Shingi Mararike, Sky News.
Time now to take a quick look at the weather. And it's going to be an unsettled start to the week with another area of wet and windy weather pushing in tonight. Conditions will settle from the middle of the week onwards, however. Many central, eastern and northeastern parts will have a chilly but bright start to the day. Rain over East Anglia and the southeast will clear early on. The showers over western parts of the country will become more widespread. Spreading to all parts, it will continue to be breezy, but winds will be lighter than yesterday. Temperatures ranging from 13 to 17 degrees Celsius. The cloud will thicken in the southwest later as low pressure brings heavy rain and gales to the southwest. Now, Spain's Prime Minister has vowed to rebuild the island of La Palma following a volcanic eruption that began 2 weeks ago. Well, this footage shows how the eruption has gathered force following the collapse of Cumbre Vieja's north side. Local media says the collapse has formed a new lava flow that is threatening several nearby towns. Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez has announced an aid package of £176 million during his third visit to the island. Military tanker drivers will take to the roads this morning in an attempt to end the ongoing fuel shortage in England. Well, ahead of his Conservative Party conference speech later, I asked the Chancellor, Rishi Sunak, if there are some MPs in his party who actually believe there could be an upside to the ongoing problems?
I don't think anyone would say that there's an upside to, people struggling with supply chain challenges and not being able to get what they want at the time they want it. No one wants to see that. I think what we have said more broadly is over time, one of our desires is to transition ourselves to a higher wage, high skill, more productive economy. I think that is a good thing. That's part of what today's Plan for Jobs announcement is about, in fact. It's giving people the skills they need to get well-paid jobs. Now, over time, that's the type of economy we want to have, which is why people don't want to just pull, as a Prime Minister, we don't want just to pull the lever on more unskilled migration. Now, in the short term, that's a pragmatic response to some of the things we're seeing, but longer term, we do want to have people in well-paid jobs, and I think that's probably the point, whether it was my colleagues or others have been trying to make.
Well, over the weekend, the Prime Minister refused to rule out further tax rises. I asked the Chancellor if that was something we need to now expect.
It was a very difficult decision to put up people's taxes. No Chancellor wants to do that, certainly no Conservative Chancellor. Difficult for me, difficult for the Prime Minister. But just remember why we did that. That was to make sure that our NHS could get the significant resources that it needs to help recover strongly from coronavirus.
We are hearing from the Local Government Association that they are going to have to see council tax rises perhaps as large, coming close to double figures, 9%, to plug the black hole in social care. I mean, can you guarantee that we won't have to see a rise in council taxes?
Well, social care is funded by a mix of different ways. One way is through local taxes, like council tax and the adult social care precept. Now, that's existed for years. That's one part of the funding system. Yeah, and the other part of funding comes from national government. And
we know this.
Well, I can't. Yes, and later in the year we have something called the Local Government Finance Settlement, Niall, where the Secretary of State for local government sets out all the plans for local government for the coming year. It wouldn't be right for me to preempt that.
Well, let's bring in our political correspondent, Tamara Cohen, occupying the very same seat at the Conservative Party conference that the Chancellor was in just a few minutes ago. Tamara, what did we learn from Rishi Sunak this morning?
Well, Niall, the Chancellor's speech today is going to be all about how he saved people's jobs during the pandemic with the furlough scheme, and now that has come to an end, he's going to try and help people into work as we recover from it. And he talked about his £500 million plan, including measures to help young people, this Kickstart scheme where employers are paid to take young people on, and also to help people on the lowest incomes and people who are over 50 to upskill for the new jobs that are available. I think you really teased out the tension that is here at the Conservative conference, because they feel they've in good fettle, they've got a good story to tell, they believe, about how unemployment has not been nearly as bad as has been expected, the economic growth is going well, but the backdrop outside here, of course, is supply chain problems, the fact that people are going to be grappling with higher fuel bills, higher inflation as we get to the period towards Christmas. And you heard the Chancellor there not wanting to suggest that the supermarkets should have a difficult time or that you should make people's lives more difficult, but very much echoing the Prime Minister's message yesterday that the government see these as bumps in the road as we transition, he said, to a high-wage, high-skill economy. It is the government's view that if there are shortages, whether it's lorry drivers or people in food production, that those people should be paid more money so that you can get local workers to do those jobs, and you don't have to, as the Prime Minister was putting it, pull the lever of unskilled immigration. And there's a tension there between wanting to ease the worst effects of those and not make people's lives difficult, but also wanting to make sure that, in the government's view, we can get over what they see as this bumpy period, and in the end, the economy will adjust to that new reality. Of course, the question is, how long might it take?
Tamara, many thanks indeed. Well, let's stick with a related topic, and there are claims that hundreds of thousands of cattle and pigs could be destroyed, all because of a shortage of butchers and abattoir workers. Nick Allen, Chief Executive of the British Meat Processors Association, joins us now. Nick, very good morning.
Good morning.
Explain exactly what is going on in the industry at the moment, something which, according to the interview that I saw at the weekend, the Prime Minister himself is as yet unaware of.
Yeah, we were surprised that he didn't understand the situation. We've been talking to government on a daily basis about the problems we've been having, so somewhat surprised that he wasn't aware of the situation. We're short of butchers and skilled butchers, and these aren't people you can just pull off the street and sort of put in the process. It takes time to sort of train these people, and we're about 10 to 15,000 pounds people short on the numbers that we need. And we've been asking the government. We're not asking the government to go back to sort of free movement and just open the doors again. We're asking them to help us manage the transition. And it takes 18 months to really sort of train a sort of butcher and get them up and running. So as I say, we're just looking for some help here to manage the transition, not actually just just stopping everything overnight, really. Especially on the background of the pandemic that we've had, where we haven't been able to train and recruit people. Mobility of labour has been a challenge, and we have had this, and we accept there's a long-term reliance on non-UK labour, which is going to take us a long time to adjust to.
But isn't the Prime Minister, I mean, given what you've just said about the reliance on low-cost workforce, I mean, isn't the Prime Minister correct, as with this situation as regards HGV drivers, that perhaps low wages are part of the problem here, if not the most significant problem?
Look, we all want to move to. We all like the idea of this high wage economy, and we've been paying more and offering more, and not actually attracting people. And we'll see what comes out of furlough. But the numbers that are on furlough and the numbers that are the job vacancies we've got suggest that we're still going to have some problems. And we know that there's no butchers on furlough or anything like that. So because otherwise they would have already been out there and finding jobs. So we all support that. But I mean, what's interesting is that they're happy to ban the import of, the introduction of non-UK labour into this country, but they continue to actually aid and abet imported food from countries that have got access to this labour. So, at the end of the day, someone has to pay for these increased wages, and they somewhat get in the way of that happening by aiding and abetting sort of imported food.
Well, Nick, let's talk about the potential consequences of those vacancies not being filled. I mean, there are reports that we could be seeing a mass cull of animals. I mean, is that accurate?
We know there's a large number of pigs somewhere, around this 100,000 mark. No one's got a handle on the actual sort of figure. We know there's about 100,000 pigs out there that we are struggling to get processed at the moment, and we know our plants are working at full capacity as best they can with the labour they've got. So there is a massive problem out there on farm, and we're hearing from farmers all the time. We're talking to the farmers, our members are talking to the farmers, because obviously they're the people they buy the pigs from. Trying to manage the situation. So there's definitely a problem out there, and it's difficult to see at the moment how we're going to get ourselves out of this difficult circumstances we're in at the moment.
What then, Nick, do you think the knock-on effect is likely to be to my Christmas dinner table? Something I have to admit that I'm already looking forward to.
The choices at Christmas will be limited. We, for some time now, because of the shortage of labour, been cutting down the variety of lines that we're doing to actually keep the plant working at an optimal level, really. So the less messing around you do with more refined butchery and things like that. So we've been cutting down the lines. So there will be fewer choices at Christmas. That's for certain, and that's already started to happen. In terms of prices, because of the amount of imported food that's coming in and helps, and the fact that actually because the farmers are experiencing a lot lower prices, I don't suppose it'll filter through in costs, really. But that is to the detriment. There's a longer term upshot of all of this, that probably our UK agricultural industry will be shrinking, particularly the sort of pig sector, and we'll be importing more food.
There will be those, Nick, this morning suggesting, and perhaps even screaming at the television, that perhaps you're exaggerating this situation, that the idea that I'm not going to have a turkey on my table alongside a ham and a side of beef is not the reality. And just for those who are of that opinion, make the case.
Look, there will be less choices. We're not saying that there's not going to be food on the table at Christmas and food available, but there won't be the sort of choices. We're struggling to put the party food together, the pigs in blankets, the netting of gammons, the turkey side. But I suspect, as I keep alluding to, the food can be imported, and probably the turkeys might not be British turkeys, but they may well end up being sort of French or even, sort of turkeys from further afield. So the way the system works in this country is that we're not saying that the world won't, there's going to be desperate sort of shortage at Christmas. There certainly won't be the choices available of British food, that's for certain.
Nick Allen, Chief Executive of the British Meat Processors Association. Great to see you this morning. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Now, the Transport Secretary has suggested the government will re-examine plans to extend the HS2 railway line to Northern England. Better public transport and, of course, the debate around levelling up the north of England, high on the agenda at the Conservative Party conference. But there is a growing debate inside the party about how it should be paid for. Our political correspondent Joe Pike reports.
How's the new job going, Mr. Gove? How's levelling up? Can you explain what it means to our viewers?
It's supposed to be their central aim, but what is levelling up?
Here's the Prime Minister.
Fantastic. Thank you so much.
Ultimately, it's up to Boris Johnson to drive through that reform, with money from the Chancellor. He's been practising his big speech and is due to announce £500 million for a jobs plan later today. Upgrading infrastructure like rail lines is part of the plan, but for some in Manchester, it can't come soon enough.
I'm pretty sick of having dust in my face if you touch the seats, or there's not enough carriages, or the times aren't regular. It's sometimes I've had to go to work an extra hour earlier just so I can ensure I'm at work at the right time.
Can bring business to Manchester and stuff like that. So if the network transport system's not strong, people are not going to want to travel.
I'm usually travelling by myself, so I'm mostly okay. But I definitely, even on the way down, it was Friday that I travelled. It doesn't seem to matter what time you get on, it will always end up being crowded.
But how will they pay for it? Some in the Cabinet are already uncomfortable about recent tax rises.
How do you feel about the possibility of further tax rises under the government?
Well, I think the Prime Minister answered that question earlier on today. He said he'd be extremely reluctant to do that. So I support what the Prime Minister said, naturally.
And you were very uncomfortable with the national insurance rights, weren't you?
How do you know that? You haven't been listening to gossip, have you? How shocking. Excuse me.
Did you consider resigning, Mr. Rees-Mogg?
I'm a great supporter of the Prime Minister.
So you did not consider resigning?
That's why I'm in office. I'm a great supporter of the Prime Minister. We have a wonderful Prime Minister who I fully support.
There are difficult choices ahead for Boris Johnson, but for now, he's enjoying the moment. Joe Pike, Sky News, Manchester.
New UK travel rules come into force today, which should make going overseas easier for those who are fully vaccinated. The so-called traffic light system, remember that? Well, it has now been scrapped. The red, amber and green list will instead be replaced with one red list only, countries where COVID remains dangerously high. Fully vaccinated residents won't need to take a test before they come back to the UK, if that is, they're returning from non-red list nations. A so-called Day 2 test will still be required for everyone arriving back in the country, but from the end of the month in England, those who are vaccinated won't need to purchase a PCR and instead will be asked to take a lateral flow. Those not vaccinated will still need to take a pre-departure test as well as a post-arrival PCR and will still have to self-isolate for 10 days, no matter where they're coming from. And anyone returning from a red list country will need to pay more than £2,000 to quarantine at a government-approved hotel. You can find out more detail about the changes to restrictions at skynews.com or on the app. Well, one attractive, far-flung destination has eased its own restrictions. Mauritius is now open for visitors. Let's speak now to John Watts from the Mauritius Tourism Promotion Authority. John, I was about to say it's lovely to see you this morning, but looking over your shoulders there, I am nothing but incredibly jealous. I suspect that working for the Mauritius Tourism Promotion Authority is quite a straightforward job.
Well, good morning from beautiful sunny Mauritius, Neil. Between the choice of party conference season in Brighton or Manchester and Mauritius, I think I may have chosen the right option. But as you say, Mauritius has just reopened our international borders as of Friday. And over the weekend, we are being inundated with British tourists who are flying in for much needed holiday, rest and relaxation.
John, just explain why Mauritius has now felt comfortable enough to open its borders in the way that it has.
So Mauritius has had one of the strongest responses to the COVID pandemic. In fact, it went through a very, very hard 18-month international border restrictions, which partially reopened back in July and fully reopened here on Friday, the 1st of October. And the Mauritian government policy was to vaccinate first and reopen second. So the country is now at a spectacular 89% vaccination rate of adults. It's also vaccinating children and teenagers, and is also now going into the booster vaccinations. So the response to COVID is world-class. When we reached those levels of vaccination rates, we decided it was safe to open the borders. And as a result, fully vaccinated visitors from around the world are now able to arrive in Mauritius with a pre-departure PCR test and then 2 antigen tests here on arrival and after day 5.
It is a remarkable achievement, certainly in terms of the vaccination programme. But as I understand it, I mean, tourism makes up a big old chunk of Mauritius' GDP. How bad has it been for the country, having the borders closed in the way that you've had to?
Well, that's right. Tourism accounts for approximately 25% of Mauritius' GDP. Around 100,000 people directly employed in tourism. The government stepped in at the very beginning of the lockdown and implemented the equivalent of the UK furlough system for people working in tourism. So people have had support throughout the pandemic, but now the borders are reopening, hotels are fully reopening, people are coming back to their jobs, and indeed, just the overwhelming joy of people who work in the travel and tourism sector here in Mauritius of welcoming the world back to the island has been a fantastic thing to be part of.
John, OK, time now for the heavy sale. What is it exactly about Mauritius that should be enticing us all to head there, aside from the 24-degree heat that I've just worked out that you're enjoying right now?
Yep, it's a beautiful, beautiful Monday morning here. This is just outside the office here in the capital, Port Louis. We have people from around the world here who have come for holidays to discover more. So not just the beach, the lagoons and the water sports, but Mauritius is more than just a beach. It is a country. There are a huge amount of things to do here, ranging from hiking in the mountains to world-class cuisine. Mauritius has a fantastic mix of cultures from India, Africa, China, and Europe, and it all comes together in this wonderful piece of paradise in the Indian Ocean.
John, is there any part of you, though, that is concerned that there may well be, in the future, some point in the medium to long-term future, a need to bring those restrictions back in?
I think in the end, Neil, what is important for destinations such as Mauritius, and indeed the global travel and tourism sector, is to work together to share information and to share data. And in the end, it is up to the individual traveller. Do they feel safe and secure and have access to information to make their own personal choices on whether they should travel? And indeed, back in the UK, there are hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people directly linked to travel, whether that be in the airlines or the tour operators. And just as it's a relief for the travel sector here in Mauritius, so it is in the UK. So we continue to monitor the figures. We have world-class health service and provision here. We're continuing the vaccination program. And the more the world works together, the more that vaccines are shared fairly and equally around the world, the safer we will be. And that is the priority of the Mauritian government. For example, investing 7% of GDP into the pharmaceutical industry so that we can help get and distribute vaccines from Mauritius across Africa, who unfortunately are not in such a great position as Mauritius is.
John, we will let you get back to the Mai Tais. Do get in touch if there's any opportunities for breakfast news presenters in Mauritius. But for now, thanks very much for joining us in the programme this morning.
Thank you.
Well, let's take you straight to Buncefield, one of the major oil depots, distributing petrol and diesel to London and the rest of the South East. From here, it will be where some of those military drivers will be tasked with driving. 200 military personnel, we believe, going to be involved. At least half of those will be sitting behind the wheel. Will it have a huge effect? Well, there are perhaps as many as 20% of petrol stations across the country without fuel. So for many, it can't come soon enough. But a clear day above Hemel Hempstead. How's it looking where you are? And it's going to be an unsettled start to the week with another area of wet and windy weather pushing in tonight, but conditions will settle from midweek onwards. Many central, eastern and northeastern parts will have a chilly but bright start to the day. Rain over East Anglia and the southeast will be clearing early on. The showers over western parts of the country will become more widespread, coming to all parts of the country. It will continue to be breezy, but winds will be lighter than yesterday. Temperatures ranging from 13 degrees to 17 degrees Celsius.